I don't want to think about tomorrow. I don't need anything money can buy. I don't have to beg, steal, or borrow. I just want to live until I die.
Clay Walker's career was absolutely on fire. His music was taking over the country music charts. In 1993, 24-year-old Clay Walker released his first album. His first two singles, What's It to You and Live Until I Die, went straight to the top of the country charts. #1 hits. The next year, in 1994, he had 3 more #1 hits. Not bad for a man who had been working in a Goodyear factory right outside Houston, Texas, just 3 years earlier. But now, Clay Walker was a part of country music stardom. But then, Clay Walker's life came to a crashing halt. Just as Clay was reaching his prime in both his personal and professional life, and otherwise completely healthy, Clay Walker was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the young age of 26. Now, it all started when Clay was playing golf in the AT&T Pro-Am at Pebble Beach in California, and he went to take his backswing. As he lifted his club into the air, he felt a shock, something he calls really felt like an electric shock, go from his neck all the way through his body, completely down to his arms and feet. Now, he felt that shock several times during the tournament, but he just kind of powered through, thinking maybe he had a pinched nerve or something, and that he'd get it looked at soon. But there was no time now, because Clay was headed to Canada for a tour. But just a couple of days later, he was out playing basketball with the guys in his band before his sold-out show that night. He was dribbling up the court when he literally started seeing double. He describes it as he looked up and could see 2 basketball goals. He started stumbling around on the court, was dizzy, just kept falling down, numbness again, all the way down his hands and feet. This time, Clay knew he had a serious problem, and he immediately went to see a doctor. And that's when Clay found out he had multiple sclerosis. Now, of course, Clay had no idea what that meant, but it got even worse really quickly when he heard what the doctor told him next. Clay, I don't know how to tell you this, but this isn't looking good, his doctor told him. You have so many lesions on your brain and brainstem and spinal cord that I just don't see how you're going to come back from this. Clay, if I had to guess, the doctor went on to say, you'll be in a wheelchair by the time you're 30, and you'll be dead a couple years after that. Now, naturally, Clay was just absolutely devastated. Just in his mid-20s, he had just been given a death sentence. Now, I've listened to several interviews where Clay tells his story about MS, and he said what I'm about to tell you a couple of times, and this is what Clay says. He says, now the rest of this story is for those who believe. And you'll see what I mean in just a minute. But before we continue, if you don't mind, would you like this video and subscribe to this channel? When you do that, it helps this YouTube channel grow even more. And then if you'd like to encourage me as I continue to tell these stories about our country music, you can do so by visiting my Patreon page, which I'll link to in the video description below. I surely would appreciate it. Now back to Clay's story. Now, Clay's mom was a devout Christian, and she tried to raise her kids, with Clay being the oldest, as Christians. But Clay's dad wasn't devout, and at this time in his life, neither was Clay. But when Clay got the news of his multiple sclerosis, he locked himself up in his room, the same room where he would write his songs, and he just laid face down on the floor, and he sobbed and prayed. He would just lay there talking to God, asking God if this was really the purpose for his life. Was this how God intended him to die? Or was there something greater ahead? Now, the way Clay described his prayer that I've heard, it sounds a lot to me like the verse in Philippians where the Bible says, to be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. So Clay prayed, just face down like this for a while. And then Clay says he just felt this peace come over him. It was a calmness and a stillness from above that told him, Clay, this is not how your life is going to end. So Clay stood up. He walked out of the room, and Clay says he's never cried about his multiple sclerosis again. Now, about this time is when treatments for MS became available, and Clay started those treatments immediately. Now, even today, there is no cure for MS. Many people with MS will see improved symptoms over time, and then many will relapse again, suffering those same symptoms or sometimes even worse. But ever since 1998, 2 years after his diagnosis, Clay Walker has been relapse-free. That means for almost 24 years now, Clay has experienced no returning symptoms from his multiple sclerosis. Now, Clay and his doctors as well call his experience with MS an absolute miracle. No one expected Clay to live this long, and certainly not to be as healthy as Clay is today. At 52 years old, Clay says he's as healthy as he's ever been. He continues to be very active, still playing golf and basketball, and still touring, and still making music. In fact, he has recently released a new album called Texas to Tennessee, and this is his latest single called Catching Up with an Old Memory.
If you see me drinking alone tonight, don't feel sorry for me, 'cause I'm just catching up with an old memory. Catching up with an old memory.
So what does Clay Walker credit for his miraculous healing? Well, first he credits his faith. He now has a very strong belief and a daily relationship with God, one that has sustained him when he was fighting for his survival. And his relationship with God continues to grow, he says. As he says in one interview I heard, it says, if I pray, I have a halfway chance of being a decent person through the day, but if I don't, there's no chance at all. Clay also credits his lovely wife, Jessica, whom he married in 2007. Jessica is the structured one in the marriage, making sure Clay takes his medicines, eats well, and exercises like he's supposed to. And Jessica has enlisted his bandmate as her network of spies to make sure Clay makes healthy decisions while he's out on the road. And Clay, of course, makes it a point to give back to others who are fighting their own battle with MS. He has an annual charity tournament at Pebble Beach, and he started a nonprofit organization, which you can find at bandagainstms.com. So that's the story of Clay Walker and his journey, a good journey, as he now calls it, with his battle with multiple sclerosis. Now, learning more about Clay and the interviews I've listened to, I found him to be a very intelligent, inquisitive, and introspective guy, and that's why I love sharing these stories about country music and the people that make it. And I'm already working on the next video about the heroes, history, and heritage of your country music. And I hope to get that video out to you very, very soon, but that's a story for another day.